watched, or are about to watch, our virtual Christmas concert, you might like to know a little more about the instruments we play. In most cases, they're very different to the instruments that we're used to hearing today, but each of them has their own charm, and hopefully this will come across in the following video. The lute is a European instrument that can trace its ancestry all the way back to the Crusades in the Middle East. An Arabic instrument called the oud was brought back to Europe where, with the addition of frets, it was able to play Western-style music. Incidentally, the word oud translates as wood in Arabic. This Arabic influence can be seen in the lute's intricately carved sound hole or rose. The medieval lute was played with a plectrum, which meant that it could only play one line of music, rather like a mandolin today. With the development of a more sophisticated music during the Renaissance, fingers were used to pluck the strings, allowing for more complex part music to be played. This was written in a new system called tablature, where letters represent the position of the fingers. This sophistication led to the lute being known as the king of instruments during the 16th century, and it was indeed played by royalty, including Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. The lute has pairs of strings called courses. The lower ones are usually in octaves, and as the 16th century moved into the 17th, the instrument grew from having just 6 courses to having 13 or more. The larger instruments were variously known as the theorbo, chitarroni, and arch lute. By the time of composer Monteverdi, these larger instruments were to be heard in the newly developing art form, opera. The name viola da gamba comes from the Italian meaning played on or between the knees. At first sight, the bass viol looks rather like a cello, but on closer inspection, you'll notice that it has 6 strings rather than 4. It also has sloping shoulders and other features that give it a very distinctive look. In fact, the viol is closer in origin to the lute than it is to any modern bowed instrument. The gut strings are played with a horsehair bow, which is gripped in an underarm fashion, allowing the fingers to tension the bow. The other hand stops the strings against frets to produce the required pitch, just like with the lute. There are basically 3 sizes of viol: treble, tenor, and bass, which made them ideal as a consort instrument, playing in groups of 4, 5, or even more. As a solo instrument, the viol had much virtuosic music written for it. It is the distinctive sound of the viol that led Shakespeare to write in Romeo and Juliet, "Music with her silver sound." Before Shakespeare's time, the first viol consort was heard in England at the court of Henry VIII, where they and their players were imported from Italy. Some of you may have had the dubious joy of learning to play the recorder during your primary school days. For many people, This has created a prejudice towards the instrument ever since. An unfair prejudice, as in the hands of a good musician, it can be an instrument of great beauty and tremendous virtuosity. The recorder has a long history. Bone flutes have been found dating back to the Stone Age, and the recorder lived on right into the time of Bach, who used them in his famous Brandenburg concertos. During the Renaissance, the recorder had a wide bore, producing a rich sound, but with the disadvantage of a limited upper register. The recorder would have been made or turned from fruitwood, box, or even ebony. It is, of course, a flute, but with the distinction of being blown through a fipple, a sharp wedge of wood seen at the window of the mouthpiece. Like the viol, the recorder was mainly a consort instrument, the different sizes producing an organ-like quality when played together by competent musicians. If there's one instrument that creates an interest at our concerts, it's the crumhorn. Looking a little like a medieval walking stick, it gets its name from the German krumm, meaning curved or bent. The crumhorn's curved shape has no sonic purpose, but does effectively shorten the length of the instrument. It is a wind instrument with a capped reed. Removing the cap clearly reveals the reed beneath, which, unlike all other reed instruments, never meets the player's lips. The resulting notes have a buzzing quality, sounding quite unlike any other instrument. It was the late David Munro who brought the crumhorn to the attention of the public in the 1970s, kick-starting the wide popularity and interest in early music. The bagpipes are usually associated with all things tartan, though Scotland doesn't have the monopoly on this rather strident instrument. Bagpipes were to be found all across Europe during the Middle Ages in a range of sizes and setups. The melody is played on the chanter pipe, whilst the drone pipe or pipes produce a continuous sound. The reeds of both the chanter and the drone are blown not by the player's lips, but by a bag which is squeezed. The player simply inflates the bag by blowing into it, but has no direct control of either sound or phrasing. Therefore, the instrument is not, technically speaking, a wind instrument, but is rather more akin to the piano accordion. The volume and portability of the bagpipes make it an ideal outdoor instrument, particularly suited to accompany dancing. The bagpipes are not strictly a peasant instrument. They were enjoyed at all levels of society during the Middle Ages and gained great popularity later in the salons of the French bourgeoisie. The gittern found favour during the 14th century, where it often appears in paintings and stained glass of the time. The gittern has a very distinctive pear-shaped body and a sickle-shaped pegbox. It is essentially a medieval instrument and would mostly be played with a quill or bone plectrum. The instrument is built from a solid block of wood which is then carved into shape. The body is scooped out to provide a sound box. This would require great skill because the walls need to be thin enough to vibrate, but not so thin that a hole appears during the construction. It seems that the gitern was well suited to song accompaniment, as it gets a mention in Chaucer's Miller's Tale. He singeth in his voice gentle and small, full well accordant to his gitterning. During the first part of the 16th century, Spain was responsible for the development of perhaps one of the most important instruments of all time, the guitar. The guitar has one big advantage over its bigger brother, the lute, in that it can be strummed. The guitar gained instant popularity as the player did not have to read complicated tablature, but could instead play from simple chord symbols. This also meant that it was louder than the plucked lute and so more suitable for boisterous accompaniment. Much smaller than the guitar of today, the Renaissance guitar had only 4 courses of strings made of gut. But its diminutive size did not dissuade composers, both Spanish and French, from writing some very fine contrapuntal music for it. The guitar was very popular in France, where it appears to have been favoured by King Henry II himself. The harp is a truly ancient instrument and is closely associated with the biblical King David. It also has other religious connotations and is often depicted as being played by the angels. If any country is associated with the harp, it must be Ireland. The Irish harp, in contrast to the gut-strung Gothic harp, often had metal strings. Henry VIII employed a well-known Irish harper at court, and the king himself is shown playing the harp in a contemporary illustration. In medieval times, the Gothic harp had a long, thin shape with a soundbox carved from solid wood. An unusual feature of the medieval harp is the use of bray pins. Each pin may be turned so that it comes into contact with the vibrating string, causing it to buzz and effectively making the harp louder. Well, that concludes our whistle-stop tour of instruments of a bygone age. Some of those instruments developed into the instruments we're familiar with today, particularly, say, the guitar. Others, like the crumhorn, fell out of fashion.
And we, the Hexacordia Trio, try to bring those instruments to life in hopefully an entertaining and musical way.
Do look out for more of our virtual concerts featuring many more instruments in the new year.
Well, that concludes our whistle-top tour